So, just how has the Australian consumer shifted, particularly since the pandemic, when global supply chains all changed, many things changed, many adjustments occurred in the economy? What actually motivates a consumer to break their routine and try your product, to change what they've done every day? You know, the same peanut butter, the same milk, the same drive to work, the same petrol station. What does it take to change that? And the shift goes much deeper than just simply pandemics and fuel price crises. There's been a fundamental shift in the way that consumers have changed. We're here because you could be starting a new business. You might be trying to pivot a business that's currently running, and you want to be able to make some adjustments to be better prepared for the future. Whatever the approach is you're taking, you need to understand the reality of the market is way different than what it used to be. So what we're going to do is bridge a bit of that on ground retail experience that I know from having three retail businesses, six now hospitality businesses, and a couple of training businesses, and see what I've done. But I'm also matching this with really good Australian data that's very much geared towards the Northern Territory, but also is reflected very similarly throughout every other state and territory in Australia. The pressure cooker that we are living under is that 74% of Australian consumers cite cost of living as a major concern. And those who aren't are obviously too rich for it to even matter. So, what we're seeing is these people are looking at cost of living and going, this is not easy anymore. And never really was, but it's even harder than what it used to be. And another 55% of those same consumers are feeling financially insecure. They do not feel like they are managing to match their revenue or their income to their households with housing increases, fuel increases, and current economic crises that are currently swirling around the globe. We do tend to be very sheltered from some of those in Australia. We've weathered out the global financial crisis in 2008. We came out of the pandemic in a pretty good state, but what we can really cite is that we've really been bearing the brunt of housing and inflation increases. And this has made it very difficult for people to feel very secure. But money isn't stopping. It's not like we're not spending as much. We're shifting where we're spending it. So where we used to have a fair bit of discretionary spending to spend on those luxuries, the holidays, the better car, the better house, the furniture, the upgrading of our lifestyles, the actual discretionary spending now has dropped by about 15%. So we're not spending as much on those things as we used to, but we have shifted that money to more essential things. We're not spending less, but we're aggressively redirecting every dollar we earn into the things where our survival things, homes, cars, fuel, transportation, education, our kids, our families, keeping food on the table. And that money has to come from somewhere. And where it's come from is a lot of discretionary retail, things like gift, homeware, upgrading your lifestyle. Basically, lifestyle stuff tends to have changed quite a lot. But it's also moved away from things like cafes, restaurants, and tourism experiences or local experiences, cinemas, bowling alleys, all the things we've spent to like parties and going out on a Friday night to have drinks with friends. That sort of stuff has really dropped off. That 15% didn't go nowhere. It didn't go into bank accounts. We're not saving any more than we did. It's just moved into supporting those essential spending rises we've had to face. Now, this is not a recent thing. This has been happening in one way or another for the last 30 years. Shopping at retail and in hospitality venues like restaurants and hotels and experiences and cafes, it's no longer the event that it used to be. I think about growing up. Thursday night was going out to the local Westfield shopping town and being able to, shopping was a thing we did once a week. It was an event. It might even be that you go out to a shopping center to meet with friends and it becomes an event of buying or window shopping. But the internet and the pandemic kind of made shopping far less friction. It made it much easier to do that from home. It meant that we didn't have to go and make an event out of shopping. And we see that with sales today. It used to be the Boxing Day sales or the half yearly clearances or the stock take sale. Now there's a sale every week. Every week there is a sale on whether it's supermarkets or whether it's Myer or David Jones. They seem to be clearing something out every week. In fact, you go to any fashion retailer, any major shopping center, and they always seem to have a sale. In fact, there's the sale rack out the front of almost every store designed to drag you in so you might buy something else in there. We're not reacting to today's prices. What we're doing, we're executing highly optimized habits that we didn't have before. We used to have different habits. Our habits were Thursday night, late night shopping, Friday night, late night shopping, Saturday going and meeting with friends and doing shopping. Now, the essential shopping we can order through click and collect. We can get it to be delivered to our homes. Even going out for dinner has now become something we can just order from DoorDash and bring it into our homes. We don't have to make an event of it. We can make it a bit of an everyday or an everyday luxury. And even loyalty has gone down the tube, really, because you've got 92% of brands being switched in the past year, whether it's, your makeup brand, the service station you go to, the particular brand of coffee that you'll buy or the cafe you go to. 92% of us have switched our regular. I think about how I've switched in the last year from a brand name peanut butter to a home brand kind of peanut butter because I don't taste the difference. They seem to be the same and they're fine. I've not noticed the difference, but I'm paying half the amount that I used to pay for peanut butter. It could come down to the fact that I've switched brands in the opposite direction from buying a cheaper breakfast cereal to buying a more expensive Carmen's breakfast cereal granola because I just like it better. So it's not like it's just for saving money. It's that we're switching brands more than ever before because we have greater choice. You go to the muesli aisle, and now it is the majority of the breakfast aisle is mueslis and granolas. And there are so many brands. And Carmen's was the big newcomer 10 years ago. But now there's Jordan's, and then there's Red Tractor or something like that. There's all these artisanal brands of these different mueslis that now exist there that didn't exist before. When we grew up, our muesli was basically Uncle Toby's, and that was it. That was it. There was one brand. Now you got something like 15 different brands of mueslis and granolas sitting in the one aisle at Coles or Woolies. So it's really easy to switch brands. What we used to do is be brand loyal to Kraft peanut butter or what is now Bega peanut butter, but it doesn't land as much anymore because the amount of choice we've got and the difference in price between them may not be great enough to cause loyalty to the brand that we used to buy. We used to buy the same cheese slices as a kid, the same peanut butter, the same milk. There was no home brand milk. There was just dairy farmers milk. And that's what we bought every day because that was the brand that we went to in our home. That brand loyalty has gone to death now because the switching cost is just frictionless. The barrier to leaving a brand these days is absolutely zero. The cost the perception of loss of going from one brand to another is so low. Now, influencers may go, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to try something new. I'm so scared. I'm so scared." That's just performative. The reality is the consumer in the shop, in the shopping center, in the walking down the street, going to a cafe, it means nothing to them to go to one cafe over another because they will just go for either a better price or a discount. 57%, in fact, will do it for that. And if the value in staying with the same place drops, consumers have no problem walking away. Now, this may sound terrible. There's no loyalty in this world, that sort of thing. But realistically, what have we done to create loyalty as business owners? Have we created an environment? Have we created an experience that people would want to be loyal to? Or is what we're doing in our business the same as 50,000 others are doing in theirs? No point of difference. So the barrier to leaving us to go to someone else is just zero. And there's been the rise of private labels. So Aldi really made this happen in Australia. But long before, there was Home Brand and Farmland, who were home brands within Woolworths and Coles. You had No Frills at Franklin's back in the 80s and 90s before they went under. So Aldi's got all their sort of fake brands and are not real. And now Costco is coming into many markets in Australia and bringing their Kirkland and other brands that like their private label brands. And 68% of us will switch so easily to a private label or home brand product. I know I did it with peanut butter. I've done it with cheese slices. I've done it with so many things, right down to yogurt and cleaning products, even cleaning products. And there's because I've noticed that there's not enough of a value difference between the two. So I'll just go for the thing that's cheaper. We are fighting a losing battle as individual businesses, if we're trying to compete purely on cheap against corporate giants who have buying power, they have volume discounting, they have logistics and systems in place, which will always beat you. You cannot compete with the corporate giants on price because they have optimized every part of what they do, right down to, the gates that you have to walk through now to stop you stealing things, and right down to even the self-serve checkouts, to make this so that it can be the cheapest they can possibly make it while still making billions in profit. You can't compete against that, but you can compete at other levels. The home brands, the example, Anko at Kmart. The entire store is practically only selling Anko. It doesn't really sell much of anything else. It's rare that you can find another brand in there. Anko is the brand, from luggage through. It's about 36,000 different lines of products that Kmart sells in Australia and through their Anko stores in the Philippines and to a number of other retailers overseas as well, that just fill out a store. They don't need to sell any brand names because Anko will do. I think they've now started selling Lego bricks because, the Lego patent has now expired. So they were selling home brand Anko bricks. Now they're also selling Lego bricks as well. So occasionally they'll drop in a name brand, but largely the Anko brand is what Kmart actually is. They could pretty much change the name of their store to Anko and it would probably still work. It's just that Kmart has such a strong brand name in Australia. What has happened though is that there used to be a middle option. You used to have the cheap, you had the expensive, and then there was still the middle ground. Now, what we're doing is people are going to either extreme. They're either going to the rock bottom prices or they're going to the exceptional quality. People are still spending money. They're just really selective how they're spending. They're migrating to the edges. Being average is no longer the safe place for a business to be in. At the rock bottom end, you got mass market, you got rock bottom prices, private labels, logistics systems, the heaviness of buying in bulk. And then down the bottom, at the top end, sorry, you got the really quality artisanal stuff. Think about bread, right? We think about bread as rock bottom. You can buy a cheap loaf of bread for about $1.50, $2 in most supermarkets. And then you can go to your local artisanal bakery doing I don't know, a particular kind of sourdough, which they'll sell that loaf of bread for $12. I actually bought a loaf of bread in Tasmania called a Finnan loaf. That's a very heavy, dense seeded loaf at a Tasmanian bakery for $22. A $22 loaf of bread. Why? Because of the exceptional quality and the experience of having that loaf of toast. You basically, it's so dense, you only need half a slice to get enough of what would normally be two slices of toast. But that was so satisfying and such a great experience. I was willing to spend nearly 10 times the amount on that particular kind of product. So we are looking for either exceptional quality and experiences at one end or the rock bottom prices just to get our trolleys full and our kids, not hungry anymore. So how does this sort of play out? Well, the cheap stuff that has been exported out of Bangladesh and China and India and other countries that have much lower labor costs than we do, it used to be cheap. It used to be cheap to get it here. It used to be cheap to produce it. It's now no longer the cheaper option. If you just look at Temu, if you look at Amazon, it's just the same as buying in any other store. In fact, you could go to Kmart and buy the same thing, often cheaper, and pick it up off the shelf and use it today, not having to wait 6 weeks for delivery. Fuel and global logistics costs have gone through the roof. So all those mass-produced goods that relied on, the shipping and the aircraft to be able to get it to there, they lost their ultimate price advantage. They no longer have the built-in advantage they once had. Distance is no longer cheap, which gives room for now the local advantage. Those who produce locally, but it's closer to the origin, you don't have the same distribution costs. You don't have the mass savings of being able to produce that. You're not growing, 13 tons of potatoes every week. You might grow, a couple of 100 kilos. And the difference being that you don't then have to pay exorbitant cost to get it there. So the price competition now between the locally produced and the imported is not that great. It used to be such a gigantic difference, the difference between paying, $1.99 a kilo and $13.99 a kilo. Now it's getting a lot closer because the cost of that distribution, the cost of the logistics has become so prohibitive. So where it leaves is an opportunity for premium local producers to hook up with premium local distributors, or cafes hooking up with farmers, or restaurants linking up with local fishing people to fill that market void. Now, the locally produced and locally sold becomes a real option because the price difference is not as great as it used to be to just import, bassa or hoki fillets from New Zealand, or bassa from Vietnam. You can now catch local fish, produce those that day in the restaurant, and be around the same price as the imported alternative. That's the local advantage now. And that's not being looked at by most people who I look at, even in Darwin around cafes and restaurants. They're still doing the same thing they always did because that's what they do. I've got a few cafes in North Queensland, and we've looked at this. Our major supplier of dry goods put up their costs by 22% just in the last 3 months. 22%. That just takes away just about all our margin. So how do we get that margin back? We've looked for other sources of that who are more local, that don't have the same sort of impact of massive logistics costs and very high shipping costs, and that's brought it down again. So that the overall rise, the overall reduction in margin for us, rather than being 13%, is about 2 to 3%. So we can absorb a 2 to 3% margin loss, but not a 13% margin loss. That's where the difference is. We've now gone to local suppliers. Now, this means instead of dealing with one or two suppliers, we're now dealing with maybe five or six. But the actual cost and efficiency to have someone dealing with five or six instead of dealing with just the one or two isn't as big as the saving we're making. In fact, it's almost nominal. It's still the same process. You're just doing it through a different person. The challenge then is the reliability of supply, and that can be very seasonal when you're dealing with locals, because tomatoes don't grow locally all year round. Blueberries don't grow locally all year round in every single place in Australia. So it means you've got to be a bit creative with what you're doing with your menus, or being creative what you're doing with what you're stocking in your store. One thing we have seen, though, is it's what used to be called the lipstick effect, is that women in the 70s and 80s, when there was major energy crises or major price rises or recessions, they would still look for affordable luxuries and buy things like lipstick, which would be relatively relatively cheap. Not a huge thing, but it's just that little luxury of every day. These days, it's coffee. That little bit of luxury of treating ourselves to a coffee or a gelato or to a lunch out with friends may seem a little bit expensive at the time, but we're not doing it every day. Doesn't mean we don't spend. We've got a squeezed budget, yes, but not that we don't spend. We just save it for those moments where we'll treat ourselves. And 23% of consumers this year, particularly in the Northern Territory, saying that they're treating themselves by actively seeking these smaller, high value purchases every month. A little treat for themselves: flowers, a coffee, a glass of champagne at a bar after work, something like that, which doesn't really have a massive impact on their budgets, but is great for their well-being and makes them feel like there's still a little bit of luxury in there every day. There's also been a shift to durability. 34% of shoppers in Australia in the last year have started seeking higher quality, built to last products rather than the cheapest stuff they can buy off the shelf at Kmart, simply because they're sick of replacing kettles every 3 months. I've had, a desktop fan that I got from Temu, which has lasted me 5 years, and it cost me about $12. This thing has just been going like a steam train. Nothing can stop it. But then I bought a toaster from Kmart that cost me $15, and it lasted me 2 weeks. I had to take it back. They replaced it. The replacement lasted 3 weeks. So we're looking for a little bit of quality. And there is a move of people who are not afraid to actually spend to get that quality. Not quality by brand name, but quality by durability. This is what we call the investment mindset, where purchases are viewed as long-term investments, not just disposables. And this is where the supply chain of cheap products coming from certain countries sort of falls down a little bit. Is because we're not just looking for the disposable toast that we can replace every 3 months. We're sick of doing that because we have to deal with it again. The mental load becomes something we don't want to do. But we might say, actually, no, if I have to replace my toaster every 3 months, why am I just buying a more expensive toaster that will last me 3 years? So we're starting to get into that mindset. Now, not everyone, only 34% of shoppers are doing that. That will only increase as the cost to our day-to-day lives of buying cheaper products seems to have its impact. So, how do we target the 2026 consumer with all this in mind? People that we need to disrupt their routine. We need to compel them into our online products and our online properties, and then maybe be able to buy something in store. Australian shoppers inevitably begin their journey online before they go in store. They will look at what they actually want. They'll be attracted to things through Instagram ads and through Facebook ads and TikTok influencers and all that sort of thing. So, what are you doing in there? What are you doing to attract people to what you do, or even making them aware of what you do so that you can bring them in store? Because you're not going to disrupt their routine of what they always spend and what they always do without somehow getting in their face with something new. And that is done online. You compel people, you engage with them online, and then finally they will deal with you in store, on the phone, however it is you happen to sell. Your digital footprint, your Facebook profile, your TikTok account, your TikTok shop, even that's your new front door. And we have to redefine what value is beyond just low prices. We're not Bunnings, we're not Coles, we're not Kmart. So stop racing to the bottom by slashing your margins down to something that's completely unsustainable. Lean into what you can do locally that reduces that cost, but also creates that feel good thing. If I'm buying something that's from a local supplier or a local artist, it feels good. So lean into that and show why your product deserves their spend. They're going to redirect their money from one thing to another at some point because there's no loyalty left anymore. It might as well be to you. So show us online why your product deserves to be bought by them instead of something that they normally would do. And then to secure the sale, you go through a de-risking process. When people are financially insecure, they really do fear buyer's remorse. They'll buy something and go, oh my goodness, I should not have done that. I booked hotels and airlines earlier this morning for July. And I had instant buyer's remorse and going, why did I do that? We don't know what's going to happen in there. But the de-risk was that all those airline credits can be changed to another time. All those hotel bookings can be purchased with a full refund up to a certain date in July. So the de-risking of that purchase made me feel a lot better about doing it. The buyer's remorse went away because these guys have transparent pricing, clear guarantees. You can cancel it then, or you can change your airline booking for another time. That means that I feel safe about the purchase. I don't have to have so much of a buyer's remorse because there's nothing to remorse. I'm actually feeling good about it. For those of you who sell physical goods, maybe emphasize the durability and the premium quality of it. Even if you're making scented candles, show how yours are different, how yours are better, how yours are more unique, something that they can have some status against. Creating some kind of brand status will help to offset the fact that you can buy candles cheaply and very, very easily at Kmart. And loyalty isn't something that's dead, but it is very transactional. We need to see some real value out of it. So just saying that you need to buy 10 coffees in order to get a free one is not going to guarantee loyalty. Buying 6 and getting a free one might do. 92% of the customers in Australia will stay loyal if the brand offers something really valuable in return. We're seeing a lot of that coming up with, Woolworths Everyday Rewards, where it's not just you just getting points to use on something you'll never do, but you'll then be able to use a $10 off discount, every so often. And it feels good. You feel like you're getting something out of it. I go to Bloom's Chemist, right? They're not as cheap as Chemist Warehouse, but then again, Chemist Warehouse is not that cheap either. But I go to Bloom's simply because every so often I'll get a $5 or $10 discount off what I'm doing. And it's like a little surprise. It keeps me loyal because I know that at some point I'm going to get something back. Everyone wants a little bit in return for their spend. And this is absolutely mandatory when it comes to retaining a customer. A little bit of empathy, a lot of transparency, and a way for people to know that they can get a reward is going to help them to be a lot more loyal to what you're doing. But if your loyalty is just like gaining points for things they'll never use, so Flybuys really struggles with this because there's no discount that you get. You just get points that you can then maybe one day use for Flybuy point cash. But it's a lot harder to see the value in that. So your top 3 takeaways here: you're either going to go rock bottom cheap or you're going to go artisanal and more expensive. As a sole trader, as someone who's just doing things on your own, the middle market's no longer there for you. The premium market is the only place to go. You cannot really afford to compete at the rock bottom unless you've got some fantastic way of doing things that hasn't been thought of yet. If you're relying on cheap imports coming because the transport of them is cheap, that's over. So the local proximity is the new competitive edge. As I said in the cafes, we're able to reduce our loss of margin from 13% to 3% simply because we switched to local suppliers. And value in that artisanal end, in that more premium end, is always going to be cheap. So focus on what you can do in your products to make them more durable, longer lasting, and somehow just a better experience overall. And look at what it is you do that is like an affordable luxury in a retail sense, affordable luxury in a service sense. Perhaps there's something you can add in there that makes it really easy to give someone a reason to come back to you. If you're an accountant, what do you do that makes someone feel special? If you are a makeup artist, what's something that you do that makes a former client go, oh, I so want to go back to her again? So think about what it is you can do beyond just delivering a service that lets people know that you are the option they want to come back to. Not that they want to come back, they just do come back to out of habit, but you make them really want to come back to you. I've got all the study I did on this, including all of the reports from right across Australia, connected into this full report and recommendations around this topic at that website address on the screen right now, or use the QR code to go straight there. You can go there and see all the sources where I got it from as well. I've included all those sources. So please do take a look and make sure you get the option to be able to, see that it's not just me seeing this. This is a trend that's appearing very much so across Australian retail, Australian business, and even Australian services.